Welcome back to another episode of Focus on EDU, EdTech, and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko with CDW Education, and today I've got Dr. Bridget Glass, who is somebody that I have a little bit of history with. We both worked back in the day at Centennial High School, but are both doing very different things now. So, Bridget, I'm going to bring you in, and you can talk a little bit about your work now, but also your background in education.
Thank you, Doug. It's so nice to join you today and to see you after so many years. I'm very excited to talk about some of my experiences. I am a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. I'm also the program director for the clinical mental health counseling program here at South University in West Palm Beach, Florida.
All right, so tell me a little bit about what you did pre South University, your journey
Right.
to get there.
So I started my teaching career as a K through 12 music teacher in Florida in 2005. And I taught 4 years of elementary, 5 years of middle school, and a year of high school. And at that time, my last year of teaching, I decided to transition to another career where I could help children in a different way than I had been previously. So I chose the field of mental health counseling. And then I completed my master's and went into a program at Florida Atlantic University to study education again. So I've always been drawn to helping students, particularly. And so I went and I completed my PhD in counselor education and supervision. So that enables me to work with graduate level students and help them train as counselors for the future. I also supervise counselors that are in an internship program. So I am a qualified supervisor in Florida and do a lot of work teaching the graduate level students here at our campus in West Palm Beach.
I love that. So what drew you to teaching the teachers essentially, right? So I know they are students, but graduate level students obviously look a lot different than K-12 students. So what drew you to continue teaching, right, as your career continued?
Mm. So I think it's a combination of my background in education and teaching students, particularly students who have experienced uh, levels of trauma and understanding that some of their behaviors and actions um, were not because they were bad or they were doing something wrong, but really just a consequence of some of the difficulties that they were dealing with in their personal lives in real time. So when I decided to go back to school and to eventually be a counselor educator, it was because I was working as a school-based mental health counselor after I was became a counsel. I can't get away from schools. I love school. So I was working with students, and I was working a great deal with students and teachers and supporting teacher wellness and helping them deal with compassion fatigue and burnout and understanding a trauma informed approach to teaching. And I realized that we probably need more counselors who are aware that um, student and help of children and adolescents is so systemic, and how to really just give that layer of understanding to other counselors in training about how much they can help change children's lives by working with parents and teachers and caregivers and sometimes courts if that's necessary. Just having that systemic understanding that so many parts of our environment, our world affect our children and how we can change the future that way. So that's really why I love teaching counselors and training.
Love that. So I want to take a little bit of a left turn.
Okay.
And you mentioned compassion fatigue, and it's something that I think we've heard that term a few times when we think about kind of the state of education today. So
Mhm.
can you tell me a little bit about like what is compassion fatigue, and what does that look like right now in education?
Sure. So, compassion fatigue is very simply put that it's the depletion of energy from giving compassion. So if you can kind of just on a very small scale, think about a kindergarten teacher and how many little bodies they have to provide compassion for, and how draining that can be at the end of the day. Even the most compassionate of people have a limit and need their cup filled as well. So that's a little different than secondary traumatic stress, which is really something that I focus on in my own research, and have actually just completed a study a few years ago on secondary traumatic stress, which is the secondary experience of trauma from witnessing other people experience like a tragedy. So, for example, we don't necessarily direct a lot of a focus on that within the education world. We mostly look at that with healthcare professionals, law enforcement. But we know that because there's such a high rate of trauma in children, particularly within the state of Florida, teachers are constantly faced with the trauma of their students and can actually experience very similar um, uh, symptoms to PTSD from just being, you know, absorbed and exposed to their students' trauma. So that's a really like important topic for me, and I try to do a lot of research, but also training of teachers and at conferences and things like that on secondary traumatic stress in the education field.
So, what does it look like for a school or district to combat that, right? To essentially work on behalf of their teachers, of their, folks who are involved the most with the students. Obviously, the mental health counselors that the schools employ are focused on those students, right? So, what can schools do to help support those teachers?
Absolutely. So thank you for asking that question. It's like my favorite one. So, um, you know, awareness, right? So administrators just from the very beginning to be aware that this is a possibility. That let's say, something happens where a teacher has to do a DCF call, or, a student in a teacher's classroom has just lost a family member and that child has had abuse, to check in with that teacher and just normalize that, if you need to talk, if you need some help, if you need some support, we're here to support you. That in itself can be such a mitigating factor in reducing attrition when it comes to secondary traumatic stress. But, also making sure that there is support among colleagues. It's critical when you go to a place and you feel safe amongst your colleagues to be able to express your thoughts and feelings in a way, to get support from peers, to not feel afraid that you'll be judged, or um, you know that others will think a certain way about you, um, to nurture that safety, to have maybe a few minutes at the beginning of a faculty meeting where you discuss, you know let's just take a deep breath, everybody. Just, let's get through maybe a mindfulness exercise, something that kind of definitely normalizes um, that we're all human beings. Even if we are working in fields where we're considered heroes, we're also human beings, and we have feelings, and our feelings can be impacted by the people we care about, and those people are many times in very devoted teachers' lives, their students.
Yeah, I think it's so important to remember, right, that yes, we're all there for the students, but you can't fill somebody else's cup from an empty cup. There's a better way to say that I'm sure I didn't say, but I know that the phrase exists.
It
Um,
does.
yeah,
It does.
you can't fill from an empty
But you're
cup.
right.
I don't know what it is, but it's something that sounds good.
Doug, do you need your cup filled? Is it?
Yeah, I clearly this cup is empty. No, so I think the follow up then would be, you know, for districts, right? It's then providing that permission, resources, support for their schools to then enact that, right? So to
For
pass
sure.
that
And
on.
EA and also EAP programs, I mean, sometimes teachers they're not aware that their district has mental health counseling services that are available to them. And maybe it's only 4 to 6 sessions, but at least it's something just to, to talk about some things if you're feeling like you're struggling. Because ultimately, if you aren't managing those feelings appropriately through help, then you're doing your students a disservice.
So now I'm going to take a right turn because we made the left to talk about
Okay.
compassion fatigue. So I do
Okay.
want to talk about, your role then at South University as a program director. So there is the teaching aspect of it, but I would imagine there's also the program director aspects of it. So what does that piece look like?
So, aside from the teaching aspect, I am charged with creating scheduling for students, making sure that students are successful, checking in with them on their outcomes or what their desired outcomes would be for the future, helping to support other faculty members. When I have two faculty members that currently are working for this program as well. So making sure that we're leading the team towards the success of students, and that we're all on the same page to provide the best instruction that's aligned with evidence-based practice, and just doing conferences, research, workshops, writing, things like that.
Do you find that you mentioned your research was in, I'm going to mess up the name, secondary trauma based. Yeah,
You're so
I
close.
feel like I got close. Um,
Secondary traumatic stress disorder.
Perfect.
Hmm.
Yes, that. So do you find that that is something that's getting more shine these days? Are there other things within, as you've seen, like mental health counseling um, evolve, right? What have you seen that evolution look like in the years that you've been involved, at least? What's becoming the bigger topics and conversations?
Right. I definitely think it's become much more of a important discussion. Not that it hasn't been important, but just more talked about in our field since COVID. Particularly because there were so many teachers that were watching their students cope with the loss of family members, isolation, sometimes being in unsafe homes for longer durations of time than they would have been if they were in school, sometimes not being able to access food. And so all of those things can be very traumatic, not only for the person who's experiencing them, but for the teachers that are witnessing this, and also learning how to teach someone a 6-year-old virtually um, for the first time in their lives. And so I think, you know thankfully, it is becoming evident that teachers absolutely deserve the same care and support that they give their students on a daily basis, and it will make them better teachers. But outside of being better teachers, just like happier happier humans. We're entitled to be good teachers and also happy humans. And that really helps our students, but also our families and our community as well.
Yeah, I think that goes across all areas, right? Is that like,
It
yes, we all
does.
do have these jobs that we go to. And so for teachers, they do go there, but then they're like a regular person. They're a real person when they leave. And I
Yeah.
know that that can be tough sometimes, especially, I talked about that, working in the community where you live, sometimes then like you go to the grocery store and you see your students and you're like, all right, I guess I'm still on. So
You mean you don't live in your classroom and you you actually leave there? I remember students used to always say that to me. They were so shocked if they like ran into me at a grocery store, and it's like, yeah, I do buy food and it's fun.
yeah, I do things out of those four walls. Um,
Exactly.
well, Bridget, believe it or not, we are already there. So, um, if there are, people want to learn more about either your work or just the type of work that you're talking about, either some folks that are influential to you, some resources that you rely on, now is the time.
Definitely journals like and affiliations like the Florida Counseling Association, the American Counseling Association, just making sure that you're aware of what's happening in advocacy throughout the state of Florida for clients, but also in education as well. Very important to be aware of these things so you can make good informed decisions.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for coming on today and sharing some of your stories with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can be notified whenever we post new content. Looking forward to seeing you next time.